I want to remind our listeners today that our goal is not to attack the character of a person, but also I want to make sure that we understand that it's safe to observe certain behaviors, certain patterns of behaviors, and that we want to take our observations and utilize those as data points that inform us on what we're feeling, why we're feeling a certain way, why we're responding a certain way emotionally speaking or even behavioral speaking, and then also to flip that and be able to do things like, why is that person? What are some of the causes that might be, the reason, that underlying cause for their behavior or their response? And that as we utilize this information, the goal is to increase understanding so that you can respond to stimuli, hurtful things, great things, happy things from an empathetic mind space where you are firmly rooted in your frontal cortex or your logical, rational thinking skills and brain space. Unpacking Mormonism is a subsidiary of Daisy Girl Communications, LLC. All content herein is intended for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice or counsel of your personal care provider. Welcome back to Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. I'm your host, Sarah Westbrook, joined by Mason Westbrook, my very handsome and sexy, bearded now co-host. Y'all, he is out of the army and rocking it.
Hey, y'all.
When you do that, you sound like one of my friends who's gay. So
That's what I was going for.
Really?
No, not at all. Just saying hi.
No, you totally remind me of a friend who I would need to ask his permission to name drop him on the podcast, who I love, and you sound just like him when you do that. So anyway.
Well, and I appreciate that. We're going to try and do just a short little intro on our podcast now for those that are maybe here for the first time or haven't listened to too much. Just a reminder of what we're about, what we're trying to accomplish, who we are. I'm just a guy who's trying to see things with more empathy and more compassion and more understanding. And it's been a difficult and rewarding experience, and you'll get to hear more of that today. Because once again, my family has given us some material that we need to address, and I'm apprehensive about that. But like you said, I think it will give us the ability to, the people we're speaking to today, I know some of you have gone through this. I know some of you will go through this, and we're hoping by processing this, which we really haven't had much time to process. I read this last night. You read it today about half hour ago.
So actually, yeah, that was one of my first questions. So can we call this Aunt Hannah or Aunt He, or what do we want to name this aunt?
My aunt.
I'm going to struggle with that. I'm going to have to come up with some sort of, you know what? I'm going to name her Aunt Africa.
Aunt Africa.
Aunt Africa. Okay, so Aunt Africa. We're not going to give her a pseudonym because Mason is uncomfortable with that, but Aunt Africa is going to work for us because this aunt is currently serving a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Ghana. So we're going to call her Aunt Africa. So yeah, Mason, about what time did you get this, or did you see this? Because it was posted. She posted it publicly on Facebook. So let's talk about that first. So let me pause. So when we sat down for our planning meeting, we were going to be planning on talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then the other episode was why we lie, or why people are not honest.
So stick around. Hopefully
so stick
those
around.
Will still go.
Right.
But not today.
Future episode. Advertising drops here going on. And Mason, you shared this with me and I encouraged you. I said, let's process this live. I want to be able to kind of model for our listeners how to do this in their own lives. Like, what do you do when something happens that makes you, or that gives you an uncomfortable emotional response? What can you do? How can we talk about it? How can we respond differently? So on and so forth.
Right.
So that we're in that frontal cortex space. And really it's about doing our best to be true to who we are or who we're striving to be when shit happens.
Well, let me just give a little background. So I have not seen this aunt for probably 21 years. Certainly not an aunt that I talk to on a regular basis. Never did. I liked her just fine growing up. Like, I don't have any issues with her. I've never.
Right. There was never what you're trying to say is, hey, y'all, there is not an established relationship with this individual in my life beyond she's my aunt. I saw her in passing occasionally, but this is not a super close family member for you.
Right. So, and the reason I bring that up is because I know that, again, some of you have been in this situation where a family member or a friend reaches out to you essentially out of the blue because they've heard something about you in your path, particularly those of us who are leaving religions or struggling with religion. So she reaches out of the blue. So a few weeks ago, she messaged me.
So hang on, I want to pause you because if we're going to do this from that emotional brain space, what makes you, the two of you, not having a close relationship significant in this case? Like, would it change if this had been, we'll say,
well, I was getting
your
to
favorite?
That.
Oh, I'm going to shut up. Go ahead, Mace.
So I feel like it's important to have the background. It's going to take like 1 minute if I can stop Sarah from interrupting me. So
good luck. We've been married for a long time.
So a few weeks ago, she reached out to me. I don't remember why. I think it was because she had listened to one of the podcasts. It sounds like it was just the introduction podcast from what I read yesterday. Anyway, she reached out to me and she said, hey, I'd love to chat with you about what you're going through. Do you have a time that we could do that? It seemed... I perceived it as kind of an urgent request, like, can we do this right now? And I think I read it at like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. There's no way I was going to do it then.
Right. Well, and I think your parents were in town when you got the initial message. I think that was
oh, yeah, I think you're right.
Your parents were in town for Hayden's play, and it was kind of like this, I am not willing to step away. Your parents were in town for maybe 36 hours.
Right. They weren't here for very long.
And you were not willing to step away from your parents being here in person. Like, they drove 20-something hours to get here. We're here for 36 hours and then drove 20 hours home. Right. You were not willing to step away. And I very much admired the fact that you put boundaries on that, because her level of urgency does not mean you need to match that level of urgency, especially when, she's in Africa, and it's not about, she wasn't like, hey, this is a family emergency. I need your response. I need your help. It was, I want to talk to you about your podcast. Right. That does not trump the in-person relationship that you're trying to maintain and honor with your parents.
Right. And I didn't have
great boundary.
Yeah. Thank you. And I love that. Excuse me, those kind of things are going to get pulled out of here, because that's what we want, is to focus on the things that went right that will help us in these kind of situations, the things that went wrong that we can then avoid in situations similar to these, so that we all can handle this kind of a thing better.
I'm going to challenge you on that. You're in a black and white thinking space. Things that went right, things that went wrong. Could we maybe rephrase that to, things that I was prioritizing, places of physical comfort or, physiological discomfort, rather than making this a right, wrong. Let's talk about this as I was boundaried. I was protecting something that was really important to me, recognizing that any conversation I had with Aunt Africa could happen in the next day, weeks, months, whatever. That's not a right or wrong thing. That was about priorities in the moment for you.
So let me just clarify my semantics, since really that's what we're talking about. When I say right or wrong in this particular situation, what I mean is things that had a positive outcome and things that have negative outcomes in our lives. Like you were saying, congratulations on putting up a boundary. that putting up a boundary and being able to hold to it in a way that helps me be healthier, that's a positive outcome. Whereas if I had taken the time then to engage her in this conversation when my parents are out there, I'm going to be resentful of the time that is taking. I'm not really in a good space. I don't know this aunt very well. I would want to kind of catch up a little bit. I would want to set some boundaries for the conversation itself. Right. And so I say right or wrong, maybe that's just kind of the way that I've grown up. But what I mean is what went well, what went in such a way that there was a positive outcome from it, what went in such a way that there was a negative outcome from it.
I appreciate that clarification. I want to add something here too that I think adds a layer of context in that your parents, this was the first visit to our house of them together since like the mess of texts from the last time and whatnot. True. And I greatly appreciate it. I mean, it was not the smoothest visit with your parents because there was some awkward moments, but that your parents had very respectfully set a boundary for themselves that they were not going to bring up the church because it was important for them to come out, support our son in his play, spend time with us, and have that be a positive experience. Right. And I think too that if you had chosen to cross that boundary, there would have been an emotional reaction that would have put us in a position of increased vulnerability to dishonor your parents' boundary of not having this type of conversation for that visit, which I'm very grateful that your parents did that. I think it's very... And I want to give a shout out to your parents for that in the sense of, yes, they did a lot of ignoring me in that attempt, but that's normal as we try and work out the kinks.
It didn't necessarily go well, but it certainly went better than it had the potential to go.
Right. And it really left that the whole, they're welcome to come again, because we can see that effort on both of our parts to honor those boundaries in order to still have a healthy relationship. I found that to be a very positive thing. So wanting to make sure we're giving context here of your parents are in town, both of us, you, me, and our kiddos, and your parents are working through the boundaries of this is our first meeting post awkwardness. Let's make sure that we're doing things to keep relationships as healthy as possible.
Yeah.
Conversation with Aunt Africa not only was just bad timing on her part. My guess is she had no idea your parents were there.
I told her, but otherwise she didn't know beforehand.
Right. So bad timing on her part, whatever, but also not willing to necessarily engage because she's not an aunt you have a relationship with, and it's potentially damaging to what we were already trying to accomplish.
So helpful to the conversation, to understanding. If you're looking at the time stamp, my 1 minute explanation I haven't finished because once again, Sarah interrupted twice.
Okay. All right, go Mason. I'm looking at this. We are at 13 minutes. You've got till minute 14. I'm shutting up. Go.
Oh, goodness gracious. So she reached out. She asked if we could talk. I said that I couldn't at that time because my parents were there. I'm getting funny looks from Sarah right now. And then we tried to work out a time that we could talk. And I think it was the next day, whatever it was the time, I texted her around that time and said, hey, I'm available if you want to talk, and didn't get any response. Later on, she texted back and said, sorry, that's a really hard time for us. I'm not sure why then she agreed to that time, but that's a really hard time for us, and tried to figure out another time. And I basically said, it's really hard for me to nail down a time. There's always stuff going on. We have teenagers and toddlers in our home. You and I are both working. So obviously it's just hard to nail down a time. And she said, I understand. That was the end of the conversation. And then that was, I don't know,
14
four
minutes
weeks ago.
I made it. I made it, y'all. I made it. Okay, keep going, Mason.
That was, I think, around 4 weeks ago. And then last night I got a post that she tagged me in. So essentially it was meant for me, but it was on public Facebook.
What's that like to have? So obviously, listeners, the post was not very nice. Okay. What's it like to have that come out in public? Like, versus a private, so she had attempted a private conversation. In my opinion, there wasn't a lot of effort to try and reach out again to follow up and say, hey, what's your, give me like 3 or 4 times this week. I'd really like to talk to you. And manage this, comment or whatever, these concerns in private. She instead went public on your Facebook account, which means you have hundreds of friends. I'm going to assume she's got several friends on Facebook. I don't know. So instead of doing this one-on-one, she's now doing this in front of several hundred, if not close to 1,000 people.
Well, the first thing was I was incredibly disappointed, mostly because while I didn't really understand what she was looking for, I did appreciate her reaching out to me individually and saying, hey, can we talk about this? I don't have any issues with that. Mm-hmm. I did have boundaries in mind as to what, and I certainly wasn't willing to sit down for a 3-hour conversation, but I'm willing to give you, 30 minutes to just kind of see where this goes. So I appreciated that from her, and then to have not heard from her again, and then to get this essentially what I would call a diatribe, it felt that way. I don't know that it actually is. It kind of felt that way.
And I love that you're starting with, so I'm going to pull out some Gottman because our goal is to model today talking about things. You started with, I felt disappointed. You started with a I feel statement. And then you filled it with your when, talking about how you took it, how you perceived it. And I really appreciate that. So listener, when we've done some of these communication things, if you go back and listen to the how to have difficult conversations, one of the things we talk about is sticking with this Gottman style communication method where you start your statements with an I feel statement and then a when or because, and you speak about the event from your perspective only. And so, Mason, one of the things that I heard you say was, she may not have meant it to be a diatribe, but I felt like it was. That's an example of you sticking with, I felt disappointed because of my interpretation of this. I perceived it to mean this is how it impacted me. Right. I felt this. So can we finish the statement up with a positive need for our listeners? Like, what would you have preferred? Remember, for our listeners, a positive need is something the partner can do differently versus a negative need, which is something you're asking them to terminate. So quick example, Mason, if you and I are having a conversation and I'm yelling at you, if you say, Sarah, stop yelling at me, that's a negative need versus positive need. Sarah, can you talk to me in a softer tone? I'm having a hard time with the increased volume, positive and negative. And I gave that example just to remind our listeners, especially those that maybe didn't listen to the other one, not because I thought you needed it, Mason. Sure. So go ahead. So give me that positive need.
I'm typically an optimist. I tend to think the best of people. So what was so disappointing was that I thought there was the opportunity for dialogue there, and not because I thought she was going to listen to my concerns. She's on a mission in Africa. I don't expect her to suddenly, leave the church, and that's not what I'm looking for. She seems to be very happy with her relationship with the church, and I'm happy for her. I'm glad. But what the positive outcome that I would have wanted was when she wrote this response on Facebook, she made it sound as if she tried multiple times to reach out to me.
The mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
When really that wasn't the case, what I would have liked was for her to reach out again, for her to say, hey, that kind of fell apart. That didn't work out very well. Are we still able to do this? Can we have this conversation? Because the last time we talked, I said yes, she said yes. We just didn't hammer down a time to do it. And so when you reach out and say, let's talk about this, but it doesn't work out one time, and then you are done, that makes me feel like you didn't care what it was that I had to say. You only care about the fact that your opinions of the path I'm walking. And she makes that clear in her letter.
Whoa. I'm going to pause you. I want you to rephrase that. There you go.
It felt like she only cares about the path she thinks I'm walking. She didn't take any time to actually understand it. She made an effort. She made a bid for that. It felt like that's what was going on. She made a bid for understanding, but when it didn't work out immediately the way that she apparently wanted it to, that was over. That's what it felt like to me. It was a simple bid, didn't work out. Okay, I'm done with this. Let me now talk about all the things that I'm not okay with. And so the chance for understanding went completely bye-bye.
Well, and I love that because you're saying the chance for understanding. I'm going to assume that if you guys had been able to nail down a time, your motivation for having a conversation would not have been to change her opinion or direction with the church that she loves, but rather for you to understand her concerns and for her to understand where you're at right now.
Right. And I know that, to just reiterate that, I know that a lot of people who get on here and listen to this podcast maybe feel like that is our goal, is to take people away from the church, and it really is not.
Absolutely not. No, if the church is working for you and you're happy and you're thriving, stay there.
I know lots of people who are very, very happy in this particular religion, or even other high demand religions. They're very happy where they are, and I'm happy for them. I don't want to take that away from them at all.
Right.
What we want to do is provide the voice for the people who are not happy in that situation but don't know what to do about it.
Right. Our goal is to provide a safe place for people to normalize their trauma and go, I'm not alone, and then to give them some psychoeducational how-tos, some very specific skills or things that they can do to start working through this trauma. And then with that added encouragement of, and go seek professional help so you can take these tools and have it personalized for you. I would say, Mason, one of the things that I'm hearing, and this is Sarah being a counselor here, is what I hear you saying is you felt very insignificant in the sense of your feelings and the impact that this type of public call out could have an impact on your life, how you felt, what you were going on. It didn't matter anymore. It was like she had to say it. She chose a public forum. She did not give you the courtesy. And that makes how this could impact you, you feel very insignificant. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, it brings up something we were talking with our producer just a few minutes before we did this, and we're asking about that because, of course, we get lots of different responses. For the most part, they've been very positive responses, at least the ones that have reached out to us.
You're talking about feedback?
About the podcast, feedback.
Yeah, feedback.
And he said that, the way that people respond, especially if they respond poorly, says a lot more about them than it does about you and what you guys are doing. And I feel like that was the case here too. The problem I think is that in this case, when you reach out in this way, it immediately puts, in this case, it has the potential to just put me on the defensive. It puts me in a place where I really just want to argue and fight with her and say, that's not what's going on. And that's rarely helpful. And so it puts me in this, I'm tight and stressed, and there's this underlying tension going on that I've learned a little better to handle over the last couple of years. But it always has the possibility of impacting my daily life. How do I respond to my children? How do I respond to my wife because of this underlying tension? And so I have to go, okay, well, why am I feeling defensive? Right. What is really going on with this that's bothering me, and be able to process that so it doesn't get pushed out to the people around me.
Right. So from that neurological brain space, what happens for you? Like, I'm totally setting you up. I am acting like your counselor right now because you said, I get this underlying tension. I get defensive. Like, where in your head are you?
Are you trying to pass me the answers?
I am trying to pass you the answers.
For those of you that have not listened to any podcasts at all, I'm in my amygdala, which is my fight or flight, freeze, or fawn response.
Right, you're in survival mode because
I'm
you've
protecting myself.
Right, because you've been called out unfairly in public.
Right.
That, to our listeners, that's not supposed to feel comfortable. And if you are going to somebody who's hurt you and you're doing it in that public forum where everybody can see you've tagged them, and whatnot, chances of you getting the type of response you're hoping for are very small. Like if Aunt Africa wants Mason to reevaluate where he is and what he's doing in his life, this is not the way to do that, because you've addressed the issue, put somebody on the spot. They are in their survival brain. The natural response is defensiveness, which puts you into either a fight or flight mode. I'm going to be honest, Mason. The first thing I want to do on that is say all public, because she also tagged our podcast. Like, my Sarah Westbrook's fight response is to thank her for the bad publicity, because bad publicity is good publicity. And she totally linked an episode or a little one of our Flash Forward Fridays that I don't feel touches anything that she claimed that it did. And I'm like, way to go, Aunt Africa. Thank you so much for having people be curious to hear how judgmental we are, when I didn't feel like that's what it was. It was very academic. I'll give her that. It was very academic, but not, I didn't feel like it was judgmental. And I'm like, lots of people are going to click on there, and people who are ready to hear what the judgmental looks like, thanks.
Well, and
that's not nice.
I want to call
that's
attention.
Not nice of me, but that's my fight response.
I want to call attention to something here, because she kind of did the parentheses of a statement that I hear from lots of people who are trying to change minds. So the very first thing she says is, I have tried to be open-minded, but. Mm-hmm. And the first thing that I see when somebody says, I've tried to be open-minded, but, is that you haven't been open-minded at all.
It doesn't feel that way.
It doesn't feel that way, right? Again, I don't want to say that she hasn't been, because I don't know. I haven't had a conversation with her. It feels like when you say, I've tried to be open-minded, but, that you haven't actually been open-minded at all or very much.
Right. Well, and then
that's the first parentheses.
Okay, then I'll let you finish.
And then the last part, the very last thing she says here is...
Wait, are you talking about like the very end of the...
The very end of the post.
Okay.
She says, I do love you, dear nephew. And I see this all the time in that they're trying to, with the first parentheses, justify why they can say all of these things. And at the end, remind you, but this is all in love. And while I appreciate the fact that she's trying to remind me of those things, I'm going to take that as a positive thing, that she's trying to remind me that she does care about me. Okay, fine. I didn't feel that from this. Nothing that she said in this letter, quote-unquote letter, felt loving in any way.
Well, and I want to point out here, there's a lot of intense response going on, and I'm going to say that because of the name calling. So, like her
I
second
have lots of
sentence,
stuff highlighted to talk about.
Her second sentence is nothing but harsh criticism. It's not spoken. It's spoken as.
Well, I actually wanted to read
fact.
that too. So
I was going to read it.
Okay, go ahead.
Here, paper, rock, scissors. Hang on.
In a previous podcast, you told me I could have all the quotes.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
So she says...
Wait, hang on, Mason. So yes, this is very critical. So again, when we talk about that Gottman communication style, what is about to be demonstrated is what they would call one of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, or the dangers that will lead to the end of your relationship. This is very critical and spoken as absolute fact, not an opinion. So she did not use a gentle startup. This is, I am breaking this down. I'm also going to say that a lot of this is very manipulative. And I want our listeners to listen for that almost gaslighting and that narcissistic, I'm going to tear this down as hard as I can, stomp on it, cover it up, and then tell you how much I love you. That's very much a gaslighting, narcissistic mind game that's going on. So I want our listeners to listen for that as Mason does all the quotes.
And we've discussed that before, right? Mm-hmm. This kind of comment, and I know you guys are just like on the edge of your seats waiting for the actual
comment.
Where's
the comment? Come on, Mason. Shut up, Sarah. Come on, Mason.
This kind of comment is typically, it feels as if what they're trying to do is shut down the conversation.
Right, they're trying to silence us.
They're not trying to start a dialogue. They're trying to silence the other side of whoever it is that you're trying to talk to.
Right, and they're doing that by discrediting it. This is very much an attack on character. Yeah. Again, because this. So, what's the difference between an attack on character? An observation.
Okay, but if you keep them in anticipation any longer,
I need to shut up here. Okay, so an attack on character would be you are. This is. An observation
it's shame.
I'm taking this as. Right. This could mean. So, right, if I'm observing, I'm recognizing that I am filtering the information through my own worldview, my own bias filter, and I'm acknowledging that my filter could be biased or that I could be off base. Whereas when it's criticism, it is spoken as fact without that option of maybe I'm wrong or help me understand this better. So that's kind of one of the signs that you can look for as our listeners.
Observation is all about how I perceived it, and the fact statement or whatever the other word you used,
factual, the critical statement.
Essentially, the shame statement in this case is filled with shut it down.
Right. And there's also some contempt in here, which you'll see. So contempt is sarcastic humor. Right. It's hurtful stuff. Go ahead.
So she'd put a link into part of the podcast, and then she says the above podcast is one of the most judgmental, unprofessional, know-it-all, name-calling, black and white, definitive diatribe I have ever heard, and that was just in the intro. Well,
no, finish the sentence. That was just in the intro. I couldn't listen to more.
Well, and if you haven't listened to the intro, I invite you to do that. I would love for you to hear this most judgmental, unprofessional, know-it-all, name-calling, black and white definitive diatribe, because it is essentially our story.
Well, my question is she talking about the introduction? See, because I didn't take it as this was the introduction to the podcast, as in like episode 000 or 001 or whatever it is, the introduction to Unpacking Mormonism. I thought it was the intro to the link that she shared of the podcast, which was a flash forward. When I followed the link, it took me to the flash forward Friday about the narcissistic, is the LDS Church a narcissistic system?
You do call the church a cult in there. So for those that don't...
Right, but I said by Stephen Hassan's diagnostic criteria.
I know.
Yeah, I agree.
And I want to call attention to that, is that if you can listen to the material, you'll recognize that's not what we're trying to do at all. And if you feel that way, please reach out to us and let us know, because we want the dialogue. We want the feedback. We just would prefer that it comes in a respectful way, and give us the opportunity to address it so that we can fix it and make it better, or at least address it with you and help you process how you felt about what you heard.
Right, absolutely. If there's a problem, please address it with us privately. I mean, if we're going to take this public because she took it public. And this is for everybody to see, so this is our response to that. But if you're going to ask about it privately, and we're going to try to do it privately, but also we'll change your name. But the thing that's really interesting to me here, Mason, is the next statement is, she says, because this is where I'm talking about the gaslighting. I want to point this out as gaslighting. And that was just the intro. I couldn't listen to more. But then the very next statement is, more and more I hear, less and less of you. So the only thing she could listen to was an intro. She doesn't listen to anything else. But apparently the more you say, the less she hears of you, but she's not listening.
Well, then if
it's a conflicting statement.
Yeah.
She just said she's not listening.
Well, and that piece was less than 10 minutes long. And most of the talking is you.
Right. I'm the one talking, not you.
I don't say very much in there either. So I'm not sure.
I hate to say it, but most of these podcasts are me talking more than you, Mason.
Well, if you
I
take
talk
it
too much.
If you take it from the perspective of we're trying to educate people on how to normalize things that are a struggle in your life, you are the one with the education to do that. Like, I'm here to provide a voice of experience as well, but you're the one with the education to say, look, this is not okay. This is the normal thing, blah, blah, blah. You're the one with the voice to do that. And I'm here to help support the education that comes from that.
Right. Because what she says in her next statement is the more she listens, the more Mason sounds like me as a mimicking.
Right.
I'm
not sure what she expects me to be. Because there again, she's talking about a podcast that apparently she's either only listened to the introduction, which was an hour and a half, or she's only listened to this one little piece, which was just a few minutes. And she's already decided that I'm mimicking you. She's already decided what my role in this podcast is supposed to be. And she's making some very severe judgment calls about something she just doesn't understand.
Right. Well, and later on, I'm looking for it now, is where she talks about, because this is why I think she was responding to the narcissistic, the flash forward Friday, which is just a couple of minutes. Because then she goes into, I've been around lots of people that don't have personality things.
It's in the third big paragraph, right after she says, yet I tried again.
Right. So this is why I don't think she's talking about our introduction episode, which is your story, but rather where she says, I don't see any most certainly personality disorders among any of the people I have ever known in the church, especially as opposed to the many lost people in this world. And I don't know what this aunt does for a living, but does she recognize what I do for a living and that I have a license to diagnose and that the information I'm giving is not coming from Sarah Westbrook. It's coming from Stephen Hassens, who is the world's leading researcher, publisher, educator on what makes a cult. So that's really interesting.
And again, I don't have any problems with her saying something like, that hasn't been my experience.
Right.
The people that I'm around in the church, I haven't noticed that at all. And then it may be asking a curious question like, where is this coming from? What's the data? That kind of thing. But she doesn't do that. She simply says, that's not how it is.
Right. That's not. And
so there's no room again for dialogue.
Right. And what's really interesting to me is, and for clarification, is when I'm talking about people diagnosed with personality disorders, the commonality amongst that population that I see in clinic, that other people see in clinic, like from the data, is that many, if not most of them, are coming from high demand systems, whether those be family systems, and usually systems that they were a part of in early childhood. So that would be religions, political systems. Like we're seeing this trend in people diagnosed with cluster B personality disorders coming from cult-like, high-demand systems where the individual is not allowed to talk about trauma without this, what your aunt has given, type of response. Like this is the perfect example of why somebody within the Mormon
into
church
sacrament meeting and say,
system,
hey, I got diagnosed with
Right.
Right?
This right here, this response that I'm looking at is exactly why people within the system have a hard time talking about the challenges they're having with the system.
Right.
Because they get called. I mean, in this, the above podcast is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 names in a row. Then you're mimicking me. And then in the next one is what the hell were you thinking inviting your family to this? How could you do that?
And I like the end of this paragraph. The end of the paragraph, she talks about you. She shared her opinion of, quote, talking about you, her caustic rants about the prophet in very childish and offensive language. Well, let me just address that. I don't know any TBM Mormon who hears something about the prophet that doesn't fall in line with what they think about the prophet, that they don't immediately write off and call offensive. So she hasn't shared any information except to tell me that I can't talk about the prophet aside from her believing, unless if I'm not going to talk about the prophet in the realm and lems of him being God on earth almost. Right. Then we can't have a conversation about the prophet. But she used those words. She said childish and offensive. Those are words meant to shut down the conversation. They're not meant to invite
criticism and contemptual statements of fact. Not, I felt like the way Sarah addressed it was childish. Like she's not owning her own perception as perception. She's talking about it as a statement of fact. And so again, for our listeners to bring this back home, it's important that when you're on the receiving end, that you're able to identify the toxic patterns of communication here so that you have more ability to process it and not take it personal. Because I think one of the things that's really normal is I'm going to hear this and my initial response is go in my amygdala, feel offended, get really angry, and feel like I got to fight back. And I want to say that's normal, that's natural. And one of the things that I absolutely loved, so before this podcast, we had a conference call with Alex Vidalis, who is the producer of our podcast. And we said, hey, Alex, we got this feedback. We did not tell Alex who it was or what the context was. Just, hey, we've got somebody that, had made these comments as somebody who's not like Alex, as far as I know, was never Mormon. Or anything.
He listens to the podcast more than anybody else.
He hears it more and whatnot. And he listens to it very differently than we do. Do you feel that this is what's going on? And one of the things that he said is, I feel that when people respond in this type of manner, it says a lot more about them than what's actually going on the podcast. Like, he does not take this as being an accurate analysis of what the podcast is about. And then we also went into, having said that, are there things that we could do in the podcast to, just kind of reiterate that that's not our goal and maybe soften those blows and whatnot. But I thought it was really important to share with the listeners, and something that I want you to be able to take in is that when people are communicating consistently and chronically with you in a toxic way, it says more about them than it does about you. And almost always they are in their amygdala, they are in their defensive brain space, which means they're probably not thinking through their responses in a rational way. They're not paying attention to how their words could hurt or harm you. And as you do that, take it for what it is, and that is, this was not shared in love, despite her claim that it was. This does not feel loving to me. And I can recognize that they are responding to, we'll say, a nerve that's been tripped. And therefore, I can recognize what I need to do based on that. Because the natural inclination is to jump right back in, fight back, say hurtful things back, respond in a way that honestly makes both parties feel more shitty.
Right. Well, and you said that this says more about them than it does about me. I feel like this comes at a very good time. Serendipitous was the word that Alex used, because just a couple weeks ago we talked about how to have hard conversations, and now some of those hard conversations you guys have probably had,
right?
And so, or maybe you're getting ready to,
right? We're right in the middle of holidays,
right? There's going to be more. We want you to be able to recognize that the statement that she made is about her. Mm-hmm. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's not about the listener. If you can wrap your head around that, then you have greater ability to step back and go, how do I want to respond? Because who am I?
Right.
What is it that I want to do? And I may respond to this but I have time to think about it. I have time to process it, because I do not want to respond in a hateful, defensive way.
Right.
I want to, and maybe I'm, again, just being overly optimistic. I want to allow for understanding. And maybe I'm wasting my breath. I don't know.
Well,
but that's who I want to be. So that if I respond, that's how I'm going to respond. And that's what we want to encourage you as a listener to do, is recognize this is about them. What is about me? So that I can go from there.
So I have two things. The first one, I'm going to respond to what you just said, and that is, when you approach conversations and your goal is to understand the other person, that's healthy. You want to go into difficult conversations with the goal of understanding the other person. That does not mean that you have to take what they say as being factual about you. We can look at this and say, Aunt Africa is responding from an amygdala brain space. It does not appear that Aunt Africa has the skills or tools to do it differently. And it also appears to me that Aunt Africa is not in a place where her goal is to understand me. Therefore, how do I want to respond while I honor my own humanity, my own boundaries? How can I maneuver with this information?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that kind of walks right into the second piece that I wanted to bring out.
Wait.
You don't want to do that yet.
Not yet.
All right.
So we've talked about how do you respond to this type of criticism and contempt when it's coming at you. But now I want to pose, what about when you do this? Because we've all done this. If you're listening to this and you are older than 18 months and talking, you've done this, because this is a natural, normal human way to respond to things that make us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So when you catch yourself in a place of, I'm criticizing, I'm being contemptuous, I'm speaking like I'm mind reading for the person, I'm being hurtful in the way that I'm communicating to somebody else, what do you need to do? And that's when we utilize, again, that Gottman skill of, I need to step away, take a 20-minute break, calm myself down, and not come back to the conversation until I am back in the brain space of wanting to understand, and I'm recognizing when my brain is feeling triggered, when I'm feeling defensive, when my heart rate is elevated. Maybe take your blood pressure. You've got to be able to pay attention to those physiological signs that you are not in the appropriate brain space to have these types of conversations.
Yes.
For me, I remember once responding to an email from my dad. My dad was very mean to me at one point in some emails, and I wrote up a response, and I was shaking. I remember my hands were shaking, like as I was typing. There was so much anxious, angry energy coursing through my body that I was trembling in anger, and there was a lot of tension in my jaw and in my neck. And I needed to send that email. So I sent it to my sister, and I said, this is how I want to respond to Dad. So I sent it to my youngest sister, and she responded back with, wow, you're really angry. Do you think now is the best time to respond to Dad's email. And I said, no, but I sent it to you because I needed somebody to read it. And she goes, oh, good. Okay. Because if you send that to Dad, all hell's going to break loose.
It's what Brene Brown calls the stormy first draft, right?
That was my shitty first draft.
She'll write it, but then she most oftentimes won't send it because she's able to kind of process the emotions, get those out, and then come back with a more clear mind and address it.
And for the record, when I sent that email to my sister instead of to you, Mason, it was because you were in frickin' Afghanistan on the front lines of bad things happening for the United States military. And I was like, I am not sending this to Mason. This is not what his brain needs because of that respect for where you were.
Right.
So I sent it to my sister, who understands the way my dad thinks and responds and reacts, and understands the way that I think and respond and react. This is the sister that I have a better relationship with. And she was very good at identifying the emotion. Wow, Sarah, you're really angry. And then, do you think this is a good time to send something like this to Dad? Like I think there was some trepidation of, please tell me you didn't already send this to Dad, which was appropriate. So utilize those safe resources. If you're like me, you need to talk it out. I mean, if y'all haven't noticed, I like to talk. Mason, be quiet. And if you need to do that, then you need to have a safe person that is not a party to what you need to say.
Yeah.
So, okay, Mason, now you can go to the second.
So, you asked the question, what do you do when you're the one that sent this kind of a letter, right? And my thought is, once you get back to, and you explain this, once you get out of that amygdala and you're back into your frontal cortex and you have some time to think about it and you've processed it, maybe you had to do your SFD or stormy first draft and write it out. Maybe you had to talk with somebody not associated with the situation and do things. My thought is, think about, well, if I had received that letter, what would I want to receive from that person?
Right. So, but one of the things that I see you doing, Mason, is you're using like the idea and the scripture of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Like that.
Well, not so much that as that. I know I just interrupted you, huh?
I was going to say, when you say that, number one, if that works for you, use it. And number two, I feel like that viewpoint that you have is something that works for you, that you gained from the spiritual upbringing you had, and that's a good thing for you. Let's use it and also give credit where I got that idea from my family, from my church upbringing within Mormonism, and that you can learn good things from systems that also have toxic things going on.
Right. And I can see that for sure. What I meant was, for me, it's a trying to understand how that person might be feeling having received this letter. Because
so
if
from
I can,
an empathy space?
So if I sent you this letter and then I go, oh crap, I'd
go to
not
Dallas
have done
again.
that.
Danny,
I
I'm
should
coming
not
to
have done
Dallas
that.
again.
Don't interrupt. And how must she be feeling now? What can I do to kind of make up for the stupid stuff that I did? And so I think for me, it's more of a reaching out and trying to be empathetic of, where is the person who received this stupid letter? Where are they right now? Mm-hmm. And what can I do to get us back to a place where we can talk about it?
Right. Because one of the things that you see next is that she's talking about wanting to hear about the disintegration of your family. I was hoping to hear, where was that? The disintegration?
I got it. It says, so I was hoping to hear about your story, what you were feeling truthfully about the disintegration of your family and how and why you are quickly losing even your faith in a God.
Well, and a God is all caps. I want to point out, if that is where she thinks you are at, why the hell is she sending something like this? Like, listeners, I want you to pay attention to that. If you are talking to somebody in this manner, when you believe that their family is disintegrating, this is not what somebody who is losing their family needs to hear.
Right.
You need to pay attention to the receiver of your message. I don't care how right you think you are. If that person is hurting identify where they are in their life or where you perceive they are in their life. This is not what you send to somebody.
Right. Well,
in that perceived brain space.
I think for me, the big part of that is something we've talked about again before, but when you're coming from a place of quote unquote truth, in this case, it feels very much like she's coming from a place of superiority. Mm-hmm. She is faithful. She is doing all the right things.
According to her.
She even goes into, we're in Ghana trying to, do the right
the self-righteous.
thing. According to her,
right.
She feels like she's doing all the right things. And so she doesn't take the time. It feels like she doesn't take the time to think about what I would need. She's only coming from this place of preaching. I've got to reach out.
Right.
I've got to check the box. Mm-hmm. Okay, I've sent the letter. I've told him how I feel and how he's going wrong. I guess I've done my part.
And now I can wash my hands of whatever happens
I can
next.
wash my hands, yeah. So
right, well, and that self-righteous, we call this that righteous indignation.
Right. I just call it coming from a place of superiority. She's
right, or
put
entitlement.
Herself above me, and so now she's on the rescue, but it's not a loving rescue, or at least it doesn't feel that way. Like, I don't know. I don't want to judge her motivation.
I believe in sometimes needing to be very forward or assertive.
Oh, sure.
In order to help somebody, but again, read the room.
Yeah.
Not on a public forum. And in a place where you're giving them, so when I wrote that first letter to my dad, not the angry one that I just talked about, but the first one where I put up a boundary that said, you cannot be unsupervised with my children because you have over-disciplined to the point where I feel it's abusive. Too many times there has to be supervision. And I don't think we've talked about that yet on the podcast.
No, we have not. So.
But when I put that letter down, one of the things, and that turned into a whole shit fest, whatever. But when I took that letter to some counselors, colleagues and friends, and I said, hey, did I handle this right or did I handle this wrong? One of the feedback I got where I had not done well in the writing of that letter was that I gave my dad everything all at once. I overburdened him with information.
Right.
And that counselor, I appreciate that feedback. That was accurate feedback. That is what your aunt is now doing to you, and that she is slamming you into a wall. That firm redirection, that constructive criticism that is sometimes maybe a little harsh or hard to hear, it doesn't come through in this manner. This is one-on-one in a quiet environment when the person has asked for it, usually, and occasionally that I need you to know how much I love you. I'm afraid for you. Again, you focus on the emotion first. So like I have a parent in past that I've counseled. This was many, many years ago, where their son was going down a path of extreme drug abuse. They were mixing things like heroin and fentanyl, and it was dangerous. And they had been in rehab a couple of times. And that parent, when we talked about how do you go to that child and say, I am terrified that I'm not going to see you live, and these were your goals, and I'm hurting, and I love you, and I want to support you, but I don't know how. It was very much from that loving place. It was not from a place of, I'm going to teach you a lesson. It was not, you need to stop doing drugs. You need to get your act cleaned up. You need to this. It was, I'm terrified. I'm terrified that little boy that I've loved my whole life is going down a path that he can't come back from. Right. My biggest fear is that I'm going to have the cops show up on my door and that I'm going to lose you and that we will never be able to reclaim this. I don't know how to help you. What can I do to help you? No matter what, I love you, but I also can't pay your rent anymore. And I cannot do these things. I need you to get help. And so I'm withdrawing financial support, but I'm also encouraging you to get help and then to let the chips fall where they may. That's a very different call for a turnaround than what we're receiving here. Yeah. I also want to point out the next thing that she did is she shames your parenting. She hits you in basically like, what kind of a father are you? Like, what are you doing?
All right, so let me read it. She says, I wonder what your new, quote unquote, values are for your children and how they will have improved lives over those who are going on missions and marrying the temple. For one, I don't need the comparison, right? She's implying, or it feels like she's implying, that if you don't go on a mission or marry in the temple, you don't have good values. And that's complete BS.
Yeah,
right?
or that youth that go on missions and marry in the temple are going to be happier than our children will be if they don't. Like,
right.
I don't care what religion you're in. I see lots of people who've been on missions and married in the temple who are blissfully happy, and lots that are absolutely miserable. I see like the divorce rate within the church for the people who checked all the boxes.
Right.
Pretty well matches the rest of the world.
There again, you're coming from a place of superiority that your perceived cultural norms are better than the cultural norms of somebody else. And that's just not a fair judgment. It's not an appropriate judgment, and it feels like a judgment. Like you said, she's shaming my parenting there.
Well, and then she goes into and completes the shame on, and what about all those people that you've taught and served over the years?
Well, I want to read that line
Go ahead.
because of this. So she says, that must be a real affront to those you served and loved when your heart was pure. And
Ouch.
So let me start with me. That feels incredibly judgmental, but inappropriately so. Like it seems like a false judgment. And let me just start with...
Well, can I ask you 2 questions?
Sure.
When you served as the bishop, did you love the members of the ward?
Of course.
You're struggling with your testimony right now.
Yes?
Do you still love the people of the ward that you served?
Very much so.
As much today as you did then?
Yes.
More today than you did then?
Some of them for sure.
Do you have a better understanding of what it's like to be in deep struggle now than you did then?
Without question.
So would it be safe to say that your capacity for loving and honoring the people you served has actually grown because of the struggle that you've been through recently?
Without question. But that was not 2 questions. That was like 12 questions.
How would you like to punish me? I take spankings. Oh, wait, this is a G-rated show. I take... No, I want to point out to people that... I want to point out to people that struggle can often turn into increased empathy once you're working through it and healing from it. People who are in struggle that are still dealing with the acute phases of trauma often hurt the people they love the most. But individuals who are working through that and feel supported and have that healing going on at the same time usually increase in empathy and understanding.
Yeah.
I can say that you do better today talking about people who drink than people who do not, people who drink coffee than people that do not, people in divorce, people in affairs, people in open relationships. Like you are, in my opinion, by the Mormon standard of who Jesus is, you are more Christ-like today than you were when you were on your mission, when you served as a bishop, when you served in the bishopric, in all of those callings. Even today, you are serving the young men of your current ward, not in the way that you used to, but you are still there. You're still showing up as much as you can for them. And honestly, I see a much more Christ-like version of my husband today than I ever have before, because your understanding has increased.
Well, and I think that's an important thing.
And I freaking love you.
I think that's an important thing that we as a group and listeners can learn from this, is that where we are in our lives, and I don't want to restate what you just said. I think that's a very good thing that you pointed out. The other thing that I feel like I want to point out from this is that this is a again, a shaming statement. And I think that if we as listeners...
And a gaslighting statement.
Yes, I think that if we as listeners can learn to recognize those statements, we will keep better control of ourselves in a situation and not say things that are not authentic to who we are. Because frankly, for her to say something like, when your heart was pure, is an incredible jab. I don't feel that a statement like that can be made with any love.
I agree.
And so if we can recognize those statements when they happen, then we're better able to cope and be authentic to who we are. Maybe it's, whoa. If you're having this conversation rather than if you're having this conversation, whoa, I'm done with this conversation. I have to step away. You don't have to address it. You don't have to respond to it. Just you recognize that was a shaming statement. I'm out.
Right.
I'm not going to continue this conversation.
From the conversation
because I'm going to say something that is not true to who I am. And that's really where that's one of the only reasons I'm even agreed to talking about this, is so that we can learn from this kind of thing how better to respond to difficult situations.
So I'm not a big fan of Dr. Phil at all, but I am going to ask you, reading this sentence, that must be a real affront to those who you served and loved when your heart was pure. What does that feel like? Like, give that a name.
Honestly, the way I feel about that is it just gave me more recognition of the fact that she is not curious and she's not trying to understand me. How did it make me feel? Maybe in some ways it actually made me feel lighter, because I recognized where she is, and so I'm more easily able to disengage from what she's trying to accomplish.
So for you, in this case, having somebody attack that part of you when you know that's not at all how I feel or whatever, for you, that was a way to say, I'm okay walking away from this. Because I was worried that would make you feel incredibly sad and depressed and concerned for those people that you served, who we can honestly say there are people who are really struggling with the fact that their bishop has left, or you haven't left the church. I say that. You haven't even left the church. You're still active in the Mormon church right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard on me because I don't want my struggles to affect somebody else, but at the same time, if you're close to somebody, their struggles are going to affect where you are. And I think that's an important part of life, is that we need our
Mason
struggles.
got closer to the microphone there. Sorry.
When we share our struggles, or when the people close to us can be a part of our struggle, they will gain empathy. They'll gain understanding if they really engage. And that can only benefit them.
Right.
So in this case, because I don't feel like there's any actual relevance to that statement, it didn't hurt probably the way that it could have, because...
But for a lot of people, that would be devastating to hear something like that.
Sure. I can see why it would be, and if I think back to when I first read that, maybe there was some of that, but I don't remember that being the case. I can see why it would sting for someone. And please don't misunderstand, for the listener, I am constantly in question of whether or not my heart is pure and what path I'm walking and those kind of things. I want to be the best version of myself, and I think that requires introspection. Mm-hmm. It requires me looking at things in my life and deciding if I'm being the best person that I can be. But to hear that from her, who wants to interject her concern.
She loves you, dear nephew.
Right. She wants to interject her concern, but it has not been asked for, and she has no clue where I am. She's making assumptions based on something that she heard that was concerning for her. She has not taken the time to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, and therefore has no clue where I am. And so I won't take her judgments about me and my character. I will not allow them to affect me. I've allowed them to ruminate simply because I'm trying to decide if and how I would respond if I do. But I won't allow them to affect me because they're coming from a place where she does not understand.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So next up, she decides to attack your wife again. I'm telling y'all, Mason's family, most of them do not like me. And I would say that many of them would really be happy if you divorced me, which is, I want to say, a really sad state of affairs. And the reason is
mostly because they don't understand how much impact you've had on my life in a positive way.
Right. Well, and the other thing here that really stands out to me is, do you have any idea the pain it would cause our 7 children if we divorced, if you left our family right now, because I don't believe the same way you do, and what that would actually cost people that this isn't their fault.
Right. It comes again from a place of judgment and not understanding. And I think that maybe we've belabored that point a little bit, because I think it's clear from what we've read that there's no attempt for understanding. Like this next paragraph is full of question marks, but they're not actually questions. They're not curiosities. And the only point that...
Go ahead and read it, Mason. You're the quoter, remember?
Well, there's only one piece of this that I really want to go into, because I'm tired of the fact that they are, once again, my family is attacking who they think the scapegoat is, but they don't understand. And I'm tired of that. And I get it, and I know other people have gone through it too. And I think again, it just comes from a place, if this happens, it's just a clue to me that they're not in a place to understand what's going on.
Right.
So she says, I especially wonder who your spiritual mentor is, question mark, question mark, question mark. I thought that was important. And then she says, Sarah, question mark, are you doing your own search with leaders you have known and admired? So that is, it's stated as a question, but really it's a judgment again. Mm-hmm. Are you doing this? Because it sounds like you're not. Is what I get from that. Mm-hmm. I know those in my family who have needed reassurance and answers went to sources that would strengthen their faith, not destroy it. The thing that I want to point out here is that we've talked about how high-demand religions put zero value on anything that is not church, quote-unquote, approved.
Right.
And it serves this... It serves this cycle of confirmation bias, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm struggling. I've got to go to the sources that are going to make me feel better.
Right.
And maybe for some people they do. I don't want to knock that. Like if you find, I know lots of people who find solace in reading the Bible or reading the Book of Mormon.
Absolutely.
I don't want to knock that at all. I think that is great if that's what you want.
I have a friend who says the Book of Mormon makes her heart sing, and she knows that it is a work of fiction, but that it still inspires her, and she is going to continue to read the pieces of it that bring her joy and inspire her to be a better person.
Right.
Bam.
She's found a place where something that means a lot to her, although the meaning has changed, she is still able to incorporate into her life.
And this is a friend who has only looked at LDS approved sources and came to the conclusion, hey, this is a work of fiction based on gospel topic essays, the changes to the, foundational story about how Joseph Smith did things, so on and so forth, the Abraham, blah, 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 blah. We can go on forever on that and get caught in some cyclone. But she went to approved church sources, and that's where she's at. And and she says probably the reason that she still stays active in the Mormon church is because she lives in a quote unquote missionary area. If she was in Utah, she wouldn't be able to handle the high, the bubble Mormons, but she feels like she has great community, and the people that she's with in her ward are good for her family. And I think that's wonderful.
She's found a positive association with the church, even though some of her beliefs about it have changed. And I think that that's great. I don't want to take that away from anyone. But the problem that I see, is that you're not allowing other people to make a journey different from what you think is right, quote unquote, right.
And she's also making the assumption that you haven't done that. Like the
Also
way that
true.
it appears that she is making the assumption that I'm the only person you are listening to as you begin to struggle with your faith.
Right.
Which your family seems to think you're really smart and stupid all at the same time, as in you obviously cannot think for yourself because Sarah won't shut up.
Well, and I think that
So
there's a precedent for that. The scriptures give a precedent for that, particularly the Book of Mormon, when it says, "Oh, the cunning plan of the evil one! Oh, the vainness and the frailties and the foolishness of men! For when they are learned, they think they are wise, and hearken not to the scriptures and to God." And I'll put that reference in here. That's from the Book of Mormon. But it's almost like a cop-out that whenever somebody is forging a new path, they must be under the control of Satan. No possibility that they're walking the right path because it's not the path I walk.
Right. This is, once again, within Mormonism, this is the path, and they claim it, the straight and narrow path, and anybody that's outside the borders of that path are wrong, dangerous. Like, she's criminalizing me very much in this. As a Mason, you got to stop listening to your wife. Go back to people who are in that prescribed, that narrow-mindedness, straight and narrow path. And what I have found is in individuals who have more education, my experience has been the more likely they are to recognize what they don't know. And I watched that phenomenon in you as you became a nurse anesthetist. You were a lot more confident, or at least you presented more confident in your early years. And now you're like, yeah, I don't know the answer to that. Yep, that's outside of my wheelhouse. I can get you to somebody who knows. And I also saw that in me. The more I learned about mental health, the more I realized we don't know. And so I don't like that scripture about the learned that think they are wise, because most of the people I know that have gone through and gotten lots and lots of education on certain things are also usually the people most willing to admit when they are wrong or when they don't know something.
Right.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
We feel like knowing something is true is a huge protection, and maybe sometimes it is, but in a lot of ways it feels more like a barrier to learning, and I think that's dangerous.
So, yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, Mason. My brain just skipped. I'm sorry. Did you finish that statement, or do you need to throw something at me because my brain skipped? I'm going to read the next couple of paragraphs really quickly because I don't feel like we necessarily need to. I
wasn't going to read them at all. I don't feel like they're helpful to this conversation.
Well, I think I'm going to disagree. I think it's important for the listeners to hear and look at all this righteousness stuff that gives me the right to, or that where I'm coming from context, because it's that pattern of, look at how good I am, look at how good these people are. But it also is very clearly illustrates why it appears that people in your family keep recommending that we get divorced. And so she says, we are in Ghana, and are you okay if I read this, by the way, Mason?
Sure.
Okay, because if you're not, I won't.
No, I don't have any problems with it. I just don't feel like it is as helpful as...
Right. So I'm going to read it all very quickly to just demonstrate that. Look at how righteous things are for me.
If you have your reasons, then let's go ahead and read it and we can talk about it.
Alrighty. So she says, we are in Ghana and are personal friends with the son of Billy Johnson, who established the church, meaning the Mormon church, in Ghana through many hardships, trials, and obstacles, going years without any knowledge of and then support from church headquarters, not to mention the priesthood difficulty that was experienced, overcame, understood, and now made peace with by real people who love the church, not Americans self-imposing foreign and unrelated trials upon themselves to make a political and anti-Mormonism stand. The understanding and faith is pioneer heroism to the core. It's sad to see our own pioneers' sacrifices get so stomped on. I recommend watching the videos at the end. And she's added like 3 YouTube videos that she wants you to watch that she's linked in this. What I didn't know until today after visiting with them at their house, an international school, is that Billy Johnson and his wife, a member and believer, divorced because of the many Christ-like commitments he sacrificed for his flock that she was not willing to make. And so it's that example of this is this person, they've done really good things, people are stomping on the pioneers, and what I didn't know before was they had to get divorced in order for things to progress.
In order for him to have the impact that he had, which she's going to tell us about. But in order for him to have the impact that he had to get divorced.
Well, because then she says, where is she and who knows or cares?
Right.
So, like, for me, I'm going, wait a minute. You're not only saying, like I'm sharing the story of amazing faith and pioneering to bring the church about, and who cares where the mother of his children are? Like, when the Mormon church says they try and keep families together, this is why ex-Mormons claim that the Mormon church only supports families within that prescribed box.
Right.
It's because of statements like this, like, where is she and who knows or cares? Like, if you are in a relationship where you share children with somebody, even if that relationship has been toxic, those kids care. At least for a very long time.
Yeah.
And that there is pain there. There's trauma there that has to be acknowledged. And I would say, Mason, for the most part, we've had a pretty rockin' awesome marriage. We've definitely had some struggles, but I would say for us, we've got years where we've just been thriving, and then something really difficult would happen. We'd have to get through that, and then we'd get back to that thriving, something difficult, thriving, something difficult.
True, but I'll never be a stake president now. Obviously, that's your fault.
Part of the reason why I moved to Missouri early, because our stake president was getting released, and I looked around and went, oh, I can't do that. I'm leaving before Mason gets called. Can you imagine how much harder this would have been if you'd been stake president in
I'm
Killeen?
trying not to.
Okay, I'm glad. I'm glad I left. So
Continue
that way they
on.
couldn't do it. All right. Where is she and who knows or cares? But Billy had no less than 6,000 people at his funeral who stayed for days mourning his death, and a country filled with gratitude for his perseverance against persecution and corrupted government to sustain the church in Ghana that now has grown to 96,508 members. What a legacy of faith, not just for the church, but to his own son who has served in numerous callings and continues to be a great leader following in his father's footsteps. I know your own father went on a mission after overcoming great odds and showing remarkable faith. I would want my children to follow a grandfather like that. I think that the challenge.
So I want to talk about that last line. So if whatever else you want to talk about, let's do that first.
So she says something, I think, in the next paragraph about me being catty and rude to her. And the only conversation I remember having 2 conversations with Aunt Africa. One was before I left the church. We had gotten some temple names. She wanted that name so that she and her spouse could do the work, which I just had to log into the account and hit the button to release it so that she could have it, or I mailed her the cards or whatever. That's neither here nor there. Where she then shouted praises to my name. And then the second conversation was when she was recognizing that I was struggling, and she shared how wonderful it was that she was going to Ghana on a mission. And my response to her, and I don't think I still have it, otherwise I would read it, was something to the effect of, one of the struggles I have with the Mormon church is that we think we're holier than everybody else. We go into foreign countries and we erase their culture. I think that's disgusting. If you're going to share your message, fine, but you need to do so with a deep respect for the culture that's already in place. Let's end culture erasure, which she was not happy with, and she quit talking to me about. So that's the only conversations that I've had with this aunt. But the thing that, again, it's like, it doesn't matter about this woman who was his wife, the challenges she went through, or the children that were impacted by the divorce. Look at this. He had 6,000 people at his funeral who stayed for days, which that mourning is part of the African culture. That is something that they do as part of their culture.
Helpful to know.
Yes, helpful to know that this is, I don't know this person. I can't say that these 6,000 people were doing it just because it's a cultural thing, but the staying 4 days at a funeral very much is an African cultural funeral way of doing things. It's how they grieve their dead and move forward. And so I'm very happy that these people had the ability to practice that culture there, and that now the church has grown to 96,508 members. And this just falls right back in line of that cult-like mentality, that high demand religious mentality is, it doesn't matter who gets lost along the way. The ends justify the means. We're not talking about the broken families, because this 96,508 members, that's a lot of broken families. We're also assuming that the only reason they got divorced was because this woman was not willing to make the sacrifices for the church. Has she spoken to this woman? Is there something else going on? Like, we are erasing people, not just cultures, but people, to achieve 96,508 members in the church.
And making judgments about them in order to make ourselves feel okay
better
about
ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. This is toxic. This is not okay. This is gaslighting. I'm erasing the reality to see things the way I want to see them so that it fits the narrative I am telling.
Right.
This is toxic. Listeners, if you see others in this place, recognize it. Let it inform how you respond. If you are doing this, recognize it. Pull back. This is a common, I'm pointing at my phone where the copy and paste is. I need to stop pointing at the phone. This is a common toxic pattern of communication. We all fall guilty to this at times. We could call this dissonance. We could call this like cognitive dissonance. We could call this confirmation bias. We can call this gaslighting. Like, there's a lot of different ways or words or, things that we can call this. I'm going to say unhealthy. This is unhealthy. When you see yourself in it, that is cue. Back up, calm down, readdress, challenge your own thought patterns. And when other people are doing it, allow that behavior to inform how you respond. This is not a person that's in a place that wants to hear how Mason is actually doing. This is not a person who wants to hear, actually, Aunt Africa, I'm still active in the church. I'm still an attending member. I still serve in a calling. This is not the person that wants to hear that.
Right. It feels like she's already made her judgments about me and is not in a curious place.
Right.
I've dealt with it before with other family members, and this is just kind of a recurrence. There's one thing I want to say about that paragraph before I move to the next piece, and that is, we're not trying to attack the character of Billy Johnson either, right? The person she's talking about, I don't know him. It sounds like he did some great things for his country, and I'm happy. Right. It's just trying to recognize the mode of communication and why something like that was input, or what purpose it can serve for someone.
Right.
So no character attacks there either. Like, I don't know this person.
I don't know who this Billy person
at
is.
all.
I've never heard of him.
The last thing that she says, and I want to repeat it, you read it. I know your own father went on a mission after overcoming great odds and showing remarkable faith. I would want my children to follow a grandfather like that. Now, let me explain to you why I don't like this statement. For one, my father is 70 years old. Mm-hmm. So she's talking about how she would want her kids, or my kids in this case, she would want my kids to follow my dad because he served a mission when he was 21 years old. For the most part, completely irrelevant to who he is today. And I'm not saying my dad is a bad person, not at all. I love my dad for the most part. He does a very good job with our children. The only real struggles we've had is his associations with Sarah. And there's some deep-seated stuff there that we're not going to go into. Right. My dad is a good person. What I want to point out...
And I would like to say, our 14-year-old daughter...
loves him.
Like, that is her papa.
Yeah, she adores him.
Who's to say that our kids are not following in the footsteps of their grandfather? Right. And I would say, I'm going to encourage my kids to look at your dad and say, these are the positive qualities in Papa or Grandpa Westbrook that I want to emulate. And these are the ones I don't. I don't like the way Grandpa treats my mom. I will never treat any of my children's spouses the way Grandpa Westbrook treats my mom. I want them to be able to say, Grandpa Westbrook struggles with A, B, and C. Those are not the things I want to emulate. Grandpa is amazing at A, B, and C. I want to be like Grandpa on those things. Right. And I would say our kids do that for the most part. I mean, for the kids that have
and we help with that,
the capacity.
And it's not to stop them from having an association with their grandpa. It is to help them have a positive association with their grandpa. But my point is that somehow she makes his choice to go on a mission the most important thing about my dad. And this is a high demand religion thing. You made one great choice in your life, and I will sit here and I think my dad would agree that was a great choice in his life. Yeah, it really had a huge impact in his life.
Well, and
it was a great choice.
He served in Bolivia, correct?
Yeah.
So he learned a second language. It helped him get a career later.
It got him back onto a straight path that he feels was good for him. Great. I won't knock his choice to go on a mission at all, not 1 second of it. But it is not, by far, the most important thing about my dad that my children need to emulate. Not even a little bit. Like if my kids want to serve a mission, great, I'll support them.
Right, we'll pay for it.
I would love for them to do that because of the things that I learned on my mission.
I will say on record, I am not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I don't believe it's true. If my kid comes to me and says, I want to serve a mission, I will gladly write the check for them to go.
Because it's something they want to do and it will be a benefit in their life. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you learn all kinds of good stuff on your mission.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to point that out, that somehow she makes that the most important thing, and it's just not.
Right. Then she says, I send this. Was there anything else you wanted to say about that,
No,
Mason?
I was going to move to the next piece. So,
okay,
which
go ahead.
is the last. So this is the last paragraph. Once again, she says, I send this post out of love and a plea to do what even I and many others, including Doug, have had to do. And this is the part that really just burns.
Doug is dad, by the way.
Doug is my dad, yeah. She says, turn around and start the climb back up to the top in the middle of an unabiding tumble down. Again, where does she get this information from? I am not in an unabiding tumble down. Am I struggling with who I was? Absolutely. Am I struggling with what I believe about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Absolutely. Am I in a little bit of turmoil over all of that? Yes, I am. Okay. But and even if I was in an unabiding tumble down, she does not have the right to call it. She doesn't know. She does not know me, and listening to a few words on a podcast is not enough to make that judgment call. And frankly, so she mentioned earlier something about me questioning a belief in God. That comes from a comment on Facebook that I commented on multiple times, because every response, I shouldn't say every, most of the responses that came to that post about someone struggling with a belief in God, it wasn't me. there was a post about if somebody's struggling with a belief in God, this is blah, 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 this is what you should do. Everything that I remember off of there was unempathetic. It did not sit with somebody struggling with the belief in God.
Right. I remember that post. Your comments were, we need to stop and understand where that person is at before we start to preach at them that there's a God. Like, they need to be heard, understood, know that they are valued no matter what. And then if they choose to believe in God, great. And if they choose not to, and there is a God, God still believes in them.
Right.
Great.
For one,
love them.
For one, so I'll make this personal. Me struggling with a belief in God. So the things that I've learned about Mormonism have made me question as to whether or not God even exists. Okay. I'm not happy in that place. That is not where I'm going to sit. I'm going to figure this out. But that is where I am right now. Okay. If you come to me trying to preach doctrine to me from any religion, obviously, for the most part, it would be Mormonism. But if you came to me from any religion trying to preach to me doctrine about God, you're not going to say a darn thing about the doctrine of God that I haven't heard and probably don't understand. And I don't mean that from an arrogant place like I know everything. That's not what I mean. You
have 45 years of Mormon indoctrination underneath you.
It means,
and by indoctrination, I mean lessons on repeat for those 45 years. Indoctrination is same information over and over and over again. We indoctrinate our kids with math facts.
I've read the New Testament 10 times. I've read the Book of Mormon 15 times. I've read the Doctrine and Covenants several times, and not just reading. Like, this is part of my study. I wanted to understand these things. You're not going to come to me with some new idea about God that I haven't heard before. But if you come to me with empathy and compassion and go, oh my gosh, that sounds awful.
Right.
I know how much God means to me. I can barely imagine sitting in a place where I was starting to question that. That sounds terrible. Can I just sit with you? Can I hold you? Can I be with you in this struggle?
Yeah.
That is the person that somewhere down the road, I might actually listen to them.
Right.
The person that tells me, oh man, you got to buck up. You got to get back to believing in God. Screw you. I don't have any interest in what you have to say because you don't understand me.
Right.
You have not showed me that you care about me. And so that was everything that I said on that post. That's what that was about. It was trying to get people to recognize you're not starting in the right place. You're starting in the wrong place. And you're going to push those people away from you when instead you could actually draw them to you. You could have a significant impact on their belief in God.
Right.
But not from the preachy standpoint of you got to get back to it. And so that's the struggle that I have here.
Well, I want to pause you because everything that you've just said is, listeners, true empathetic connection heals.
Right.
Empathy heals emotional wounds. If you are struggling, you need to find people who can provide empathetic understanding and connection in your life. And when people demonstrate they cannot do that for you, accept it as the reality. I know it hurts. It fucking hurts. I know that. But being able to say that person cannot be my healer today. I'm not saying cut contact. I'm saying recognize they are not in a place where they can provide for me what I need to find my way. Because what we know from the research, what we know from Gottman's research, is that when a person feels heard, validated, and understood, and they do that through empathetic communication and follow-up behaviors, when that happens, the wounds heal. And I see this in my clinic. Everything from chronic marital affairs to you didn't start the dishwasher last night when I asked you to, the empathetic, validation, and connection is what heals humans. It's what heals relationships. And I would say that if there is a God, and he truly is, and I say he because that's what most people would identify God as.
Right.
But if there is a God and he truly is what we Christians believe he is empathetic, understanding, and holds space for your pain long before he lectures and calls you to repentance. Now, my issue with God is that that's not what I see in the Bible. So I think there's some question marks there. But I, Sarah Westbrook, personally believe in some sort of higher power that connects us. And I cannot define what that higher power is, but I hold a place of respect for it. That's where I'm at. Sarah Westbrook is at. I don't know what it is, but I don't think it's what's described in the Bible.
Right. There's one more piece of this that I want to
and then I have a follow-up question for you as well.
Okay. Well, why don't you ask the question?
My question is, on the public forum, who has come to your back? Who has stood up for you? What has your family's response been?
From what I can see, there's two people that have hearted it. They've loved the response. One is a cousin, her daughter. I would expect that.
And the others?
And the other is my brother. And the problem with a post like this, of course, and Facebook, we've talked about this before. The problem with Facebook is when he hearts this or likes this, who the heck knows what part of this he actually loves? And so it's not a fair place to make a judgment about people, but it certainly doesn't feel like there's any support.
Well, that's my question is, what does it feel like to know that your brother reads this about you and about your wife and about your family and about your struggle and hearts it and does not say a single thing like, hey, Aunt Africa, you're really misrepresenting my brother, or this isn't the place to do this. If you've got an issue with my brother, you need to make it private. Like, where's the loyalty for you?
Right. There's not from this brother. Like, I love him. He's a good man now. I've never had a strong relationship with that brother, and so I'm not surprised by this, but it is a little disheartening.
Right. So my question is,
it just reminds me that he's not in a place to have an educated, empathetic conversation about this either.
And that was where I was going to go is, what does the response say about the people who are seeing this? And what does the lack of response say about the people who see this? Because I can guarantee if I saw somebody post this on my sister's webpage, on their thing, I'm going to have a response. Now it's going to be, I understand that you are struggling with some of the choices that my sister is making, but putting this on a public forum is not appropriate. And I respectfully ask you to take it down. That would be my response. If somebody did that to my sister, even my siblings who I don't have a good relationship with, if I saw something like this come up, I would have their back. 100%. It would be, this is not how you do this. Back off my brother, or back off my sister, back off my son. Ooh, if you do this to my kids. Oh, Sarah's mama bear is not very nice, but you don't have that. And what, as a listener, because I know, Mason, that you are not alone in this.
I'm certain.
I know that. I've got a really good friend of mine from high school whose brother is like a brother to me. And when somebody did this to me on Facebook, that friend had my back and said, this is not okay. Don't talk to Sarah this way. I don't care what you think about them. This is not the time or place or the way to do that. And I cannot even describe how much value I place in Matt's defense of me. I mean, he didn't agree with the person. He didn't agree or disagree with me. He just said, this is not the place and that's disrespectful. Knock it off. And I appreciated that. So I would say to the listener, again, these are data points for you. What does this tell you? And how do you respond in a way that is true to who you are, but also honors your own personal boundaries of protection. Because Mason, I think one of the things that you're saying is, I can't go to this brother and say what Aunt Africa said was really bothered me. Number one, she did it in public without giving me a chance to talk to her, a real chance to talk to her privately. And even if you agree with some of what she's saying, I'm feeling really insert feeling. You can't do that with that brother. Who can you do that with? I know you've got one cousin.
I have at least one cousin that I could do that with. I certainly have a sister that I could do that with, maybe two, and I certainly could do that with you. Gratefully, I have a few people that I could address this with if I needed to.
What about your parents?
Right now, I'm doing this with the world.
Well,
I don't know. I have a very good relationship with both of my parents. I don't think that I could address this with either one of them. One, because they would focus on the wrong things, and one, because I think that it would put them in a bad place. So I just, I don't think that I can do that with them. There's one last piece of this that I want to pull out. It's the last line of this paragraph before she says, I do love you. So she said, turn around and start the climb back up to the top in the middle of an unabiding tumble down. Then she says, believe me, it is worth it. I pray you will privately and with only God's voice in your head truly reconsider your direction and make a course correction before you truly regret it. Now, the point I want to pull out here is that my experience is mostly with Mormonism, but again, high demand religions. We're here about religious trauma. What she asked me to do was to truly reconsider my direction. But she immediately followed that up with, and make a course correction before you truly regret it. What that tells me is that she's not interested in me considering my direction. She's interested only in me changing my direction.
Back in line with what
right.
she thinks is the right one.
And I feel like this happens all the time, right? Like in general conference, the apostles will talk all the time about how you have the right to make the choice. You need to pray about it. You need to make the choice. But the answer is always in line with the church. And the problem is you're asking people to do something, but directing the outcome. Right. And that is not asking for me to truly reconsider. That is asking me for a change into what you are comfortable with.
Right.
And I want...
It keeps people entrapped in the control of the toxic system.
Right. So what I want for the listeners to recognize is that piece. Recognize when they are asking you to do something, or it seems like they're asking you to do something, but they're not. What they're asking for is different than what it sounds like they're asking for. And so be aware of that, because if you're aware of that, you can either hold it in and disengage, or you can call them out on what they're asking for. If you're in a safe place to have a conversation, you can say, look, you just asked me to do something different than what you think you're asking for, and you can have a conversation about it.
Right.
So I have one more thing that is not this. So if you have anything else that you want to say, Sarah, no? Okay. So what I wanted to do real quick is contrast. So I had a long conversation with another family member, and I will not say who that is because of the situation. But I had a long conversation with another family member who I have had many, many conversations with.
Right, so you've got a solid relationship with this individual.
Their struggles, about my struggles, about their life, about my life, good, bad, ugly, everything. We have a very good relationship, I feel. So we had a conversation about this and where I am, because we haven't talked about that very much. So this person says, near the end of our conversation, they say, I am sorry that you're facing this, and without the support of your family, quote unquote, extended, for what it is worth. I am not worried about you. You will make the right choice for you. Whatever you decide, it will be the right thing for you. As they say, let the rest sort itself out in the wash. And the reason I wanted to bring that up, because in contrast, this person demonstrated that they care about me. They don't care so much about my choices, where I go. I mean, that matters to them as well. Like don't get me wrong, that matters to this person as well. But it does not matter more than I do. And I think that's the big deal. And so when you, the listener, are out there trying to find the people who can support you through whatever it is you're going through, look for the people who will demonstrate that they care more about you than they do about whatever outcome they're looking for. Right. They can have a care about the outcome, but it cannot trump their care about you.
Right.
And so I wanted to demonstrate that as a contrast.
Well, and I want to add to one of the things that's really interesting to me is that according to the doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the atonement covers you struggling with the church and even you leaving the church. And if the Lord truly understands all the things that led you to walk away because that was what you felt was best for you, then there is a path right back home to go back to heaven. That is a part of their doctrine. And yet my experience so far is that so many of them are so adamant that if you don't fix it right now, you are lost forever. It's interesting to me that they do not believe their own teachings. If Christ's atonement truly covers everything except for cold-blooded murder, is that accurate, Mason? And denying the Holy Ghost.
Denying the Holy Ghost, whatever your opinion of what that means.
And that, right. I remember being a kid, and it was you had to have a sure knowledge, and that was explained to me as if God came into my house and stood before me. Then I have a sure knowledge. There's nothing that I'm taking on faith because I have witnessed and touched God with my own hands.
And there's different opinions about what that means.
Right.
But whatever your opinion is, yes.
Right. And so they're not believing of their own doctrine that if I extend forth a hand of love and fellowship, God will make things correct in the end. They're not practicing that.
Well,
Instead,
it
doesn't feel like they're practicing that. And instead, they're utilizing Satan's plan, which is supposed to be all terrible, which is compelling you to do it in the prescribed way.
It feels an awful lot like they're taking the example of Pilate, who had the ability to not send Jesus to the cross, but chose instead to wash his hands symbolically of it, as if that would help. It feels like one of the worst examples we have of how to handle a situation is how so many TBMs, true believing members, want to handle the situation. They want to reach out and say, don't do this. I don't think this is right. Pilate said, I don't find any guilt in him. I don't think this is right. But then he goes, all right, I wash my hands of it. Do what you want. And it feels like that's what's going on here. Is just this is that
right.
You know, that Hail Mary attempt that doesn't actually allow for any communication. It's just that Hail Mary, you gotta stop. You can't do this. Oh, well, my attempts didn't work, I guess.
I yelled at you not to,
I washed my hands of it.
I'm
going to be okay. And so it feels very much like it's them trying to make sure that they're okay rather than them trying to make sure that I'm okay. Yeah. And I think that it's important for us to recognize that difference.
Back up. Say that again.
So it's them trying to make sure that they're okay rather than them trying to make sure that I'm okay.
I love that.
That attempt from her was almost like her saying, I got to do something. I'm feeling guilty. I got to do something. So this is what I'm going to do. I know I'll add a little shame in. I'll add this or that, which probably was not conscious. It's just the way that she has probably learned to do this.
Right.
But I have to throw that out there so that I can wash my hands of it if it doesn't go okay. And I just I want us to recognize that this is not about them trying to help us. It's about them trying to help themselves. At least it feels that way.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for being here.
I want to add one more thing, and that is I want to make it abundantly clear that the majority of people who are still actively engaged in the Mormon Church, in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, have reached out. The majority of people who have reached out to us have been loving, gracious, kind, generous, and for the most part, open and loving. For the people that have reached out to us.
I don't even think that this reflects that much on my aunt's character. I think it's just the way that she has learned to do things. And she did it without thought understanding.
I just want to clarify that what our personal experience has been is that 9 out of 10 people have been as understanding as they have the capacity to be, loving, generous. They're not purposefully trying to exclude our family. Sometimes they're doing it, and I can see that it's inadvertent or awkward because they don't know a different way, but that there's a great deal of love and goodness in their heart. I would say only about 1 in 10 have this type of toxic, ugly, harmful, abusive response to us, and that the majority of the people who have responded in the way that your aunt has do not know us very well, with the exception of your brothers. And mostly your brother, and your sister, who know you better, but not super close. But I would say outside of your immediate family members, your extended family members, most of them have been gracious if they've reached out.
Yeah.
And I want to make that abundantly clear that it happens a lot. It is very common. We're talking about, I'm going to say, experiential 10% of people are responding in a really toxic, abusive pattern. But I also want to give that, 10% are reaching out, much like the person was that you shared this is the in contrast post, and that most everybody else is falling somewhere in between.
Yeah. And
that in the words of Brene Brown, I believe that for the most part, people are doing the best that they can.
Yeah, we talk about these, the ones that didn't go very well, because we can learn so much from them, not because they are the majority of what kind of communication we're getting.
Well, and I again want to reiterate, I'm really hoping today, listeners, that what you got from this was, number one, if you're experiencing this, you're not alone. And number two, some very specific skills that you can begin to develop to make sure that you are protecting yourself from abusive and toxic communication patterns, that you can catch yourself when you're engaging in those toxic or abusive patterns, and how to begin to identify where your boundaries need to be with individuals in these types of situations. We are so honored to be here. We are so grateful for our listeners listening to us. Please feel free to reach out to us via email. If you directly tell us in an email, we do not want this talked about on the podcast, we won't talk about it on the podcast, because we want to make sure that we are honoring boundaries and protecting identities as much as possible. But we do want to hear your feedback, positive or negative. Again, if it's sent to us in a respectful way, we are happy to respond to it. Thanks so much. daisygirlcommunications.com or daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com. Have a great night or day or morning, whatever. Have a good one. Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is hosted by me, Sarah Westbrook, and my husband, Mason Westbrook. Produced by Daisy Girl Communications and Alex Vidalis. Our music today was Moving Forward by Run to Life.